It was one of those quiet mornings that always seemed to stretch forever. The kind where the hum of fluorescent lights blended with the faint chatter of early customers and the rhythmic beeps of the checkout scanners. The grocery store smelled faintly of coffee and freshly mopped tiles, and behind register 3 stood Eli, a young cashier who never seemed to stop smiling. Even when life gave him every reason to, he was the kind of person customers remembered. Not because he said much, but because he had that calm, patient presence that made people feel seen. He'd bag your groceries just right, throw in a polite joke if you looked stressed, and somehow make standing in line feel a little less dull. But that morning, there was something different in the air. The store's supervisor, Rick, had been pacing since opening, a man in his 40s, always wearing a clipped tone and a frown that could slice through glass. He'd been with the company for years, and he wore his authority like armor. Everyone knew he liked to throw his weight around, especially with the younger staff. Eli had learned to stay out of Rick's way. But no one could stay invisible forever. The day had started normally. Customers trickled in. A couple of regulars chatted about the weather, and Eli went about scanning items, making sure every receipt was neat, every bag well packed. The calm rhythm of his work had a meditative quality, a quiet escape from the noise of life outside. Then Rick called out across the floor, "Eli, you double-scanned this item yesterday. Do you know how much that mistake costs us?" The words sliced through the low murmur of the store. Heads turned. A few customers glanced up from their carts. Eli froze for half a second, his hand hovering over the register. He looked up, startled. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize—" "Of course you didn't," Rick interrupted, his voice sharp enough to echo. "You never realize until someone else has to fix it." The tension hung in the air like static. Customers exchanged uncomfortable looks. One older woman in line frowned and muttered something under her breath. Eli's face turned red and he gave a small nod. "It won't happen again," he said quietly. Rick just smirked. "It better not." And with that, he turned away, as if the scene hadn't just left a sting in the air. Eli exhaled softly and went back to scanning items, his hands steady but his chest tight. It wasn't the first time Rick had done that, but this time felt different. The humiliation hadn't been private. It had been a performance. What Eli didn't know, and what no one in the store could have predicted, was that this small, embarrassing exchange would ripple through his life in ways no one expected. Because on that very same day, by pure coincidence, the district manager, a man known for his calm, professionalism, and no-nonsense ethics, was scheduled for a surprise visit. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how everything spiraled to that fateful confrontation, we have to go back just a little, to the quiet battles Eli had been fighting long before the district manager ever stepped foot in that store. The store wasn't just a job to Eli. It was stability. It was his way of paying rent, saving for college classes, and keeping his promise to his mother that he'd make something of himself. He took pride in the small things, the order, the consistency, the routine. It was a kind of peace that made sense. But peace is fragile when you're working under someone who thrives on control. Rick had always been the kind of supervisor who believed fear kept people efficient. If you made a mistake, you'd hear about it, loudly. If you worked too well, he'd find a reason to cut you down anyway, just to remind you who was in charge. And Eli? He was easy to target. Too kind, too quiet, too unwilling to push back. That morning lingered in his mind long after his shift ended. On the bus ride home, he stared out the window, watching the city blur by. He told himself not to care, that he just had to get through another day. But somewhere deep down, the embarrassment still burned. He replayed the moment in his head, wondering what he could have done differently, wondering if the customers who saw it would remember him as that kid who got yelled at. And yet, amidst all the frustration, Eli still held on to something, a kind of quiet dignity, a belief that doing the right thing mattered, even when no one noticed, even when it didn't seem to pay off. That belief would soon be tested. By the time he clocked in the next morning, word had already spread among the staff. Someone had seen the incident. Someone had even whispered that a complaint might have been made, though no one knew who filed it. Rick, of course, acted as though nothing had happened. He barked orders, checked stock sheets, and moved through the aisles like a storm in human form. But there was a flicker of something different in his tone, a subtle edge of paranoia. He'd been told that the district manager was visiting soon, and the one thing Rick couldn't stand was being caught looking unprofessional. So he did what insecure people often do when they feel threatened. He doubled down. And Eli was once again in his line of fire. That's where our story begins. In the middle of a store that looked ordinary on the surface. But behind the shelves and bright aisles, something quiet and powerful was brewing. A story about dignity. A story about standing up, even when you don't mean to. And about how sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise or revenge, but quietly, unexpectedly, in the middle of an ordinary workday. The morning after the incident, the store buzzed with the usual rhythm. Carts rolling, scanners beeping, the low hum of conversations. But for Eli, everything felt heavier. He could still hear Rick's voice echoing from the day before, sharp and humiliating. He told himself to shake it off. After all, he'd been through worse. Eli had grown up learning to stay calm, to pick his battles. He'd been raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to remind him that kindness wasn't weakness. "People can take your time, Eli," she used to say, "but don't let them take your peace." He held on to that like a mantra. But working under Rick made peace a daily challenge. Rick strutted through the aisles like a man who owned the place. Clipboard in hand, eyes scanning for mistakes. If a product was misplaced by half an inch, he'd make a scene. If a cashier forgot to greet a customer within 3 seconds, he'd pull them aside for a talk, and those talks weren't quiet. He liked his authority to echo, both literally and figuratively. "Details, Eli," he'd say loudly, arms crossed. "You've got to care about details if you want to keep this job." Eli would nod, always polite. Always quiet, even when every word felt like a pinprick. Yet, despite it all, customers loved Eli. There was something disarming about his demeanor. Calm eyes, gentle voice, and a sincerity that couldn't be faked. Older customers would go out of their way to line up at his register. Parents trusted him with their kids' candy selections. Even when the line was long, people waited. Because Eli made them feel like more than transactions. It was small things. A thank you, a genuine smile. Have a good day that sounded like he actually meant it. And that was exactly what irritated Rick. He didn't like anyone outshining him. Especially not a cashier who, in his eyes, was replaceable. One afternoon, a regular Mrs. Patterson, an older woman who'd been shopping there for years, stopped by Eli's register with her usual cart of groceries. "You're the only one who bags things properly?" she said, smiling warmly. "Everyone else just tosses the bread in like it's a football." Eli laughed softly. "I'll make sure the bread gets VIP treatment today." "Ma'am." Rick, who happened to be restocking nearby, shot them both a look. After Mrs. Patterson left, he walked over, lowering his voice just enough to sound intimidating. "You think this is a comedy club, Eli? You're not here to charm customers. You're here to work efficiently. You understand?" Eli blinked, taken aback. "Yes, sir." Don't talk back," Rick snapped. "If you have time to joke, you're not moving fast enough." He turned away, leaving Eli staring down at his register. Another small wound. Another moment swallowed in silence. The rest of the week followed the same rhythm. Quiet effort met with loud criticism. Eli's co-workers noticed. Some tried to offer small gestures of support, a pat on the shoulder, a whispered "hang in there." But most stayed out of it. Rick had a reputation for retaliation. Speak up once, and you'd find yourself on the least desirable shifts for weeks. So they watched quietly as the pattern continued. Eli never raised his voice, never complained. But inside, the tension built like a coiled spring. One evening after closing, Eli stayed behind to restock shelves. The store was nearly empty, just the faint hum of the refrigerators and the squeak of the cleaning machine. He found peace in that stillness. The work was physical, repetitive. No one to criticize him, no eyes watching. As he lined up the cereal boxes perfectly, Rick's reflection appeared in the freezer door. "Still here?" Rick asked, his tone dripping with mock surprise. "What, trying to earn brownie points?" Eli kept his tone even. "Just finishing the aisle, sir," Rick smirked. "You don't get paid extra for pretending to care." He walked closer, lowering his voice. You think these people appreciate you? The customers? The company? They don't. You're just another cashier. The moment you mess up again, they'll forget you ever existed. Eli didn't reply. He'd learned that silence was the safest response. Rick lingered for a moment, waiting for a reaction. When he didn't get one, he scoffed and walked away, his footsteps fading down the aisle. Eli exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against the shelf for balance. It wasn't just exhaustion anymore. It was weariness, the kind that seeps into your bones. But something interesting started to happen. Customers began to notice. They could sense the tension. The way Rick hovered near Eli's register. The sharp tone he used. The way Eli's smile seemed just a little more strained lately. And customers talk. One afternoon, a young mother asked quietly, "Does your boss always talk to you like that?" Eli smiled politely and shook his head. "It's fine. He's just doing his job." But the mother frowned. Doesn't seem fine. She wasn't the only one who thought that. A few regulars had begun leaving feedback on the store's online survey, mentioning a supervisor who bullied staff publicly and a cashier who deserved better. Eli had no idea, but those quiet comments would soon reach higher ears. Meanwhile, Rick's paranoia grew. He started hovering more, correcting things that weren't wrong, criticizing speed, posture, even how Eli folded receipts. It wasn't management, it was control. And deep down, everyone knew it. Still, Eli endured. Because he needed the job. Because walking away felt like losing. And maybe a small part of him believed that someday, someone would see what was really happening. Someone would notice. He didn't know it yet, but that day was coming. And it would arrive with the calm authority of a man who'd built his career on fairness. The district manager. But before that confrontation, before the justice, came the breaking point. The day when Rick finally went too far, in front of everyone. It happened on a Friday, one of those chaotic afternoons when the store felt like a hive of noise and motion. The air buzzed with the sound of beeping scanners, chatter, and the dull clatter of carts rolling across the tile. Eli was at his register, focused as always. His line was long but moving smoothly. Every customer got a polite greeting, a genuine smile, and that small touch of kindness that made him stand out. He was tired. He always was these days. But he had learned how to wear his exhaustion behind a calm expression. What he didn't know was that Rick had been watching him closely all morning. Rick had been on edge for days. He'd overheard whispers that corporate had received complaints, that a district manager might be stopping by soon for a routine inspection. But deep down, he knew it wasn't routine. It was about him, and in his mind, there was only one person to blame. Eli. He'd convinced himself that Eli was playing the victim, making him look bad, manipulating people with his polite act. The idea festered like a splinter he couldn't remove. So when Rick noticed a small delay at Eli's register, a customer asking a question about a coupon, he saw his chance. "Eli!" The sharp voice cut through the air. Heads turned. The customer froze, holding a loaf of bread midair. Eli looked up, startled. Rick strode over, the sound of his shoes echoing like punctuation marks. His expression was a storm brewing behind tightly drawn lips. "You've got 6 customers waiting," Rick barked. "What's the holdup?" Eli blinked. "She just had a question about the coupon, sir." "You're always almost done," Rick interrupted, his voice rising. "You think this is a social hour? Move faster." A few customers shifted uncomfortably. One whispered to another. Eli's cheeks flushed. He tried to stay calm, his hands trembling slightly as he scanned the next item. Rick didn't stop. He leaned closer, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know what your problem is. You think a smile can make up for incompetence. But smiling doesn't make you good at your job, Eli. It just makes you look desperate." The store went silent. Even the background music seemed to fade. Eli froze. His throat tightened, his pulse drumming in his ears. He didn't look up. He couldn't. A child in line tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Why's he yelling at him?" The mother frowned, whispering back, "He shouldn't be." Rick straightened, scanning the crowd as if daring someone to challenge him. No one did, but the looks on their faces said everything. Eli swallowed hard, finishing the transaction. His voice cracked slightly when he said, "Have a good day." The customer gave a sympathetic smile, murmured, "You too, sweetheart," and walked away. Rick folded his arms, watching like a hawk. "I expect better. Eli, you're lucky I haven't written you up again." Then he turned and walked off, leaving behind the heavy silence of shared discomfort. As the line moved again, Eli's vision blurred for a moment. He blinked rapidly, trying to keep his composure. He felt humiliated, not just by Rick's words, but by the public nature of it. The customer's pity was worse than the scolding. It made him feel small, powerless. But deep inside, something started to shift. A slow burn. For the first time, anger mixed with the sadness. Not the kind of anger that lashes out, but the kind that grows quietly, patiently until it becomes resolve. Later that day, during his break, Eli sat in the small employee room at the back of the store, a space barely large enough for a table and a vending machine. He sat in silence, staring at his reflection in the vending machine glass. He didn't hear Rick come in until the door shut behind him. "You made me look like a fool out there," Rick said, his tone low but sharp. "All those customers staring like I'm the bad guy. You think you're some kind of hero?" Eli looked up slowly. His eyes were tired but steady. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I just do my job." Rick's lip curled. Well, maybe not for long. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You've been getting too much attention lately. I've seen the way customers talk to you. It's unprofessional. You want to be a favorite? Fine. But this isn't a popularity contest. You're here because I let you be here. Don't forget that." Eli didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. Rick held his stare for a moment longer, then turned and left. The door swung shut, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Eli sat there, his pulse still racing. But this time, the fear had been replaced by something else entirely. Determination. That night, when he got home, Eli told his mother what had happened. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When he finished, she said softly, "Some people mistake kindness for weakness, but one day that man's gonna learn the difference." Eli didn't say anything, but the words stayed with him. They would come back to him in the days ahead, when everything finally came crashing down. The next morning, the store was unusually busy. A weekend crowd, carts piled high, the energy restless. But something felt different. Rick was dressed a little sharper than usual, his shirt pressed, his tone unusually cheerful. The reason became clear soon enough. A sleek black car pulled into the lot. A man in a navy suit stepped out, calm, composed, clipboard in hand, the district manager. And though no one knew it yet, his visit would change everything. As the man walked through the doors, Rick straightened like a soldier. He plastered on a smile and greeted him warmly. "Welcome, sir. We've been expecting you." The district manager nodded politely. "I'm just here to observe today." "Carry on as usual." Rick's smile faltered, just a fraction, because as usual was the one thing he couldn't fake. Scanning, smiling, greeting. But as the district manager made his way through the aisles, observing quietly, the truth of Rick's management style began to reveal itself. Not through reports or spreadsheets, but in the small human moments, the fear in the employee's posture, the silence when Rick entered a room, the way customers exchanged glances when he spoke, and soon, the same scene that had humiliated Eli would repeat itself, only this time, with an audience that mattered. The next morning, the air in the store felt different, heavier somehow, but quieter too. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting the same sterile glow. Yet something about the energy was off. Employees spoke in softer tones, moving with careful precision. Even the background music felt subdued, because everyone knew. The district manager was in the building. His name was Mr. Lewis, a tall man with an even demeanor, calm, observant, and polite, in a way that made people instantly lower their defenses. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He was the kind of leader who noticed everything. The misplaced label, the nervous glance, the unspoken tension in a room. And within minutes of his arrival, he noticed exactly that. Rick greeted him at the door with a forced smile and that same false confidence he'd used for years. Welcome, Mr. Lewis. Everything's running smoothly as always. You'll find our numbers are consistently strong under my supervision. Mr. Lewis nodded, offering a polite but non-committal smile. That's good to hear. I'll be doing a standard walkthrough, observing your team, and speaking with a few customers as usual. Rick's smile flickered. Just a little. He wasn't used to being observed. He was used to doing the observing, but he kept his composure, ushering Mr. Lewis inside. Of course. You'll see that this store runs like clockwork. Eli didn't see Mr. Lewis right away. He was focused on his usual tasks, scanning, bagging, smiling, doing his best to keep the tension from showing. After the humiliation the day before, he'd barely slept. The memory replayed in his mind in flashes, the sound of Rick's voice, the stares, the sting of helplessness. But now, all he wanted was to get through his shift without drawing attention. Ironically, attention was coming for him whether he wanted it or not. Mr. Lewis moved through the aisles, clipboard in hand, making small notes. He watched as employees avoided eye contact when Rick passed. He noticed the stiff, almost rehearsed politeness that seemed to vanish when Rick wasn't around. He noticed how Eli's demeanor shifted whenever Rick approached, the slight tightening of his shoulders, the way his smile became more mechanical, small details, but they spoke volumes. At one point, Mr. Lewis lingered near the self-checkout section, pretending to inspect a display while quietly observing the registers. Eli's calm professionalism stood out immediately. Friendly, efficient, genuinely helpful. The customers seemed at ease with him. Rick, meanwhile, hovered like a shadow, pacing, correcting, occasionally cutting in to bark unnecessary comments. "Keep your line moving, Eli," he said sharply. "Let's not slow down for chit-chat." Mr. Lewis raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He simply noted the exchange on his clipboard and continued watching. A few minutes later, a small issue arose. A customer's card wouldn't swipe. It wasn't anyone's fault, just a faulty chip. Eli stayed calm, offered to manually enter it, and apologized for the delay. The customer smiled, saying, "No problem, you've been very helpful." But Rick swooped in like a hawk. "What's going on here?" he demanded loudly. "We've got a line forming. Eli, this is basic. You've got to be faster." The customer frowned. "He's fine, really." "He's doing great." Rick forced a laugh. "Of course, ma'am, I just like to make sure our employees stay sharp. Some people get comfortable." The smile didn't reach his eyes, and that was the moment Mr. Lewis quietly stepped forward. "Everything all right here?" Rick turned, startled to find the district manager standing just a few feet behind him. His posture stiffened instantly. "Oh, Mr. Lewis, yes, everything's fine. Just a little coaching moment, making sure we maintain standards." Mr. Lewis's expression didn't change. He looked at Eli, then at the customer, then back at Rick. "I see," he said evenly. "Please continue. I'd like to observe a bit more." Rick nodded, his smile faltering. Eli met Mr. Lewis's gaze briefly, and in that split second, he saw something calm but powerful there. Understanding. Awareness. It was enough to steady him. Over the next hour, Mr. Lewis quietly gathered his evidence. He spoke to customers, reviewed sales data, and took notes on the interactions he'd witnessed. He even asked a few subtle questions of the employees, questions about work culture, feedback channels, and management support. The answers told him everything he needed to know. One stock clerk, glancing nervously toward the office, said quietly, "We try our best to keep up. Sometimes it's hard to stay motivated." Another cashier hesitated before whispering, "Some of us have thought about transferring. It's just the environment." Mr. Lewis thanked them both and made another note. By the time he finished his walkthrough, the picture was clear. Rick's smooth-running operation was running on fear, not respect. That evening, after the store closed, Mr. Lewis asked Rick to join him in the office for a quick debrief. Eli, gathering receipts nearby, couldn't help overhearing part of it through the thin walls. "Your staff seem nervous," Mr. Lewis said calmly. "Any idea why?" Rick chuckled awkwardly. "You know how it is, sir. Young workers, they're sensitive. They take things personally. I'm firm but fair." There was a pause. Then Mr. Lewis's tone shifted, still calm but colder. "I see. Because what I observed today didn't look like firm guidance. It looked like intimidation, public criticism, a lack of respect. Rick stammered. With all due respect, sir, I think you're misinterpreting. My team. Your team is afraid of you, Rick. Mr. Lewis interrupted, his voice quiet but cutting. And that's not leadership. That's failure. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Even through the wall, Eli could feel it. When the meeting ended, Rick stormed out of the office, red-faced and trembling. He didn't say a word to anyone, just grabbed his jacket and left. Eli looked up as he passed, but Rick didn't meet his eyes. Mr. Lewis stepped out a few moments later, his demeanor calm once more. He looked around the nearly empty store, then at Eli. You're Eli, right? Eli nodded, uncertain. Yes, sir, Mr. Lewis gave a small nod. You handled yourself well today. Thank you for your professionalism. Eli blinked, caught off guard. Thank you, sir. Mr. Lewis offered a faint smile. Keep doing what you're doing. It matters. And with that, he left. That night, word spread quickly among the staff. No one knew the exact details, but everyone knew one thing. Something had changed. Rick didn't show up for work the next day, or the day after that. And soon enough, the announcement came down officially. A short, polite email from corporate stating that a change in management had taken place. Eli read it twice before it sank in. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just sat quietly at his register that morning, the hum of the store feeling lighter than it had in months. For the first time, peace felt possible again. But this isn't just a story about karma catching up. It's about something quieter. The strength it takes to stay kind in a cruel environment. Because sometimes, the loudest form of defiance isn't shouting back, simply refusing to become like the people who try to break you. The store seemed to breathe differently the next week. The fluorescent lights were the same, the aisles still neatly lined, the scent of lemon cleaner still lingering in the air. But there was a softness to the place now. Conversations felt looser. Laughter returned in small bursts. Even the beeping of the registers sounded less like a metronome and more like a rhythm. Rick was gone, at least for the moment. And in his absence, something quiet and powerful settled over the team. Relief. But relief isn't the same thing as closure, and Mr. Lewis knew that. He came back on a Wednesday dressed the same way. Navy suit, calm expression, a clipboard tucked under one arm. He didn't announce himself with a meeting or a speech. He simply walked the floor, just as he had before, letting the quiet tell him what he needed to know. When he reached Register 3, Eli looked up. Good morning, sir. Morning, Eli, Mr. Lewis said, offering a small nod. If you have time on your break, I'd like to chat. No dread, no threat. Just calm, Eli nodded. Of course. In the break room, the two sat across from each other at the small table, a hum from the vending machine filling the silence between their words. I want to be transparent, Mr. Lewis began. I'm reviewing the circumstances around several write-ups and complaints. Some are routine, some aren't. I'm also looking into customer feedback and checking procedural compliance. I'm not here to put anyone on trial. I'm here to understand what's true. Eli nodded, hands folded together. He wasn't sure what to say, and he didn't want to sound like he was attacking anyone. He'd never wanted that. You don't have to speak about anything you're uncomfortable with, Mr. Lewis added gently. But if you'd like to share your experience working here, I'll listen. There was a long pause. Then Eli took a breath and told the truth. Not as a speech, not as a complaint, but as a steady recounting of moments, the public criticisms, the coaching that felt more like punishment, the constant nitpicking for the sake of control. He didn't dramatize. He didn't embellish. He simply laid out the facts of what it felt like to walk into the store each day and leave feeling small. Mr. Lewis didn't interrupt. He didn't prod. He just wrote a few notes, then set the pen down and looked up. Thank you, he said. That helps, Eli nodded. I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble, he added quietly. I just want to work without feeling like I'm failing every second. That, Mr. Lewis said, is exactly why we do this. He met with others too. A stock clerk who'd thought about quitting, a cashier who had once asked for a schedule accommodation and been told she was not special, a night manager who had learned to stay quiet to keep the peace. Their stories weren't explosive. They were small, consistent threads, and when woven together, they formed a pattern. Mr. Lewis then turned to the paperwork. He requested every formal write-up made by Rick in the last 12 months. He looked at timestamps, cross-checked camera footage, and compared shift logs with performance notes. He wasn't hunting for a gotcha moment. He was looking for alignment, or the lack of it. And in the silence of the back office, under the dim light and the soft whir of the computer tower, he began to see it. One write-up cited Eli for prolonged personal conversation at register at 10:42 a.m. Mr. Lewis checked the footage. Eli was helping an elderly customer who'd dropped a bag of rice and struggled to reach it. He'd stepped out from behind his register, knelt, gathered the spilled grains with a dustpan, apologized, and then carefully rebagged the rest. The transaction took longer than usual, but there was no personal conversation. Another write-up mentioned insubordination when Eli refused to comply with an instruction to move faster. On footage, Mr. Lewis watched Eli scanning items at a steady pace while a mother calmed a fussy toddler. Eli paused, smiled at the child, handed over a small store sticker from the drawer, and continued scanning while keeping the customer at ease. No refusal, no attitude, just humanity. It wasn't only Eli's file. Other employees had coaching notes that coincidentally lined up with days when customer compliments were recorded in the survey system. The more Mr. Lewis looked, the more the image sharpened. A supervisor keeping control by writing paper trails that didn't line up with reality. He closed the last file and sat back. Patterns tell stories. This one spoke loudly. Before taking the next step, Mr. Lewis went to the floor again, not to watch but to pitch in. He stocked canned soup for 20 minutes with the night manager, then helped a new hire replace price labels on aisle 7. He asked simple questions as they worked about procedures, training, and how errors were corrected. What happens, he asked the new hire, when someone makes a mistake? The young man glanced around, lowered his voice, and said, "Depends who sees it." Mr. Lewis nodded. He didn't need more. On Thursday afternoon, he called a small meeting in the office. Just a few people, himself, HR from the regional office on a video call, the night manager, and the assistant manager who'd been filling in since Rick's absence. He laid out what he'd found, calmly, without theatrics. Consistency isn't just about numbers, he said. It's about how you treat people when the aisle is messy, when the line is long, when a customer is upset. Documentation matters, but it must reflect reality. When it doesn't, we lose trust. And trust is our operating system. He didn't say Rick's name until he had to, then he did. Based on observed behavior, corroborated accounts, and misaligned documentation practices, we're proceeding with corrective action regarding Rick's employment. HR will handle the formalities. The room didn't react with cheers or relief. It reacted with stillness, the kind that comes after holding a breath for too long and finally letting it go. The assistant manager asked quietly, "What do we tell the team?" "The truth," Mr. Lewis said. "That leadership is accountable too." That night closing felt different. People moved slower, like they were acclimating to a new climate where they didn't have to brace for a storm. Eli cleaned his register with careful, familiar motions. He didn't know the details of what had happened, but he sensed the shift, like gravity had lightened a degree. As he finished, Mr. Lewis stepped beside him. "Walk with me?" he asked. They took a slow lap down the front aisle, past the seasonal display of cinnamon-scented candles and discounted blankets. "I wanted you to hear this from me," Mr. Lewis said. "We're making a change in store leadership," Eli swallowed. Because accountability matters," Mr. Lewis replied evenly. "And because the way people feel at work isn't secondary to the work itself. It is the work." They stopped near the entrance where the automatic doors sighed open and closed to no one. "I don't expect perfection," Mr. Lewis continued. "I expect honesty, effort, growth. You've shown those. Many of you have. It's leadership's job to make that possible, not punish it." Eli looked down, then back up. "Thank you," he said softly. "For seeing it." Mr. Lewis nodded once. "Thank you for staying kind when it would have been easier not to." The formal decision arrived the next morning. HR sent the email. Effective immediately, Rick's employment with the company was terminated for violations of leadership conduct and documentation policy. The phrasing was dry, as these things always are, but everyone understood the weight behind it. There wasn't a celebration. There were no balloons, no speeches, just a palpable quiet, the sound of a team unclenching. For the first time in months, the shift meeting was short, warm, and practical. The assistant manager, stepping into the interim role, brought coffee and thanked everyone for their patience during a challenging period. She asked for ideas, and people actually offered them. The stock clerk suggested a new labeling system. The night manager proposed rotating front-of-store greeters on busy weekends to help lines move faster and give cashiers space to breathe. Eli didn't say much. He just listened and realized he was hearing possibility again. That afternoon, as if the universe wanted to underline the lesson, Mrs. Patterson rolled her cart up to register 3. "There he is," she said, smiling. "The only one in this place who knows bread is fragile." Eli chuckled. "VIP treatment, as promised." She lowered her voice and leaned in conspiratorially. "I don't know what happened behind the scenes, dear, but the air feels clearer." Eli bagged her items carefully, placed the bread on top, and handed her the receipt. "We're trying. I can tell," she said. Then with a mischievous glint, "And if anyone gives you trouble again, you tell them Mrs. Patterson is writing a letter." He laughed, a real one this time. "I'll keep that in my back pocket." She patted his hand. "You keep doing what you do. The right people notice." When she left, Eli stood a moment longer at his register, feeling that truth settled in. The right people had noticed, and it had made all the difference. Late that evening, with the store quieting, Mr. Lewis sent one more message. Not an email this time, but a short note taped to the break room corkboard. "Respect is policy. Excellence is human. Thank you for showing both." No signature. He didn't need one, because by then, everyone knew what a different kind of leadership looked like. Steady, fair, almost understated. The kind that doesn't need to be loud because it knows what's true. And maybe that was the real turning point. Not just the removal of what was wrong, but the return of what was right. Dignity in the ordinary, pride in small acts, and a shared belief that work could be a place where people grew instead of shrank. The team went home that night tired, as retail workers always are, but not defeated. The weight had shifted. The floor felt level. As for Eli, he walked out into the cool evening air, the parking lot lights casting long, gentle shadows. He took a breath and felt something he hadn't in a long time. Not just relief. Permission to hope. And tomorrow, justice would feel a little less abstract and a lot more real. The news became official on a quiet Monday morning. No dramatic announcement, no confrontation. Just a short, matter-of-fact message posted on the employee bulletin board. Effective immediately. Rick Thompson will no longer be employed by the company. Interim leadership will be managed by Assistant Manager Carla until further notice. That was it. No speeches, no fanfare, just a simple end to months of tension. Yet everyone who read it felt the same unspoken exhale. The air seemed lighter. The aisles seemed brighter. Even the old radio behind Register 1, stuck between 2 stations, sounded less harsh. For the first time in a long while, people smiled without checking who was watching. When Eli came in for his shift, Carla greeted him with a genuine warmth that caught him off guard. "Morning, Eli. Thanks for coming in early. I wanted to say, you handled yourself better than most adults twice your age would have." "We all saw it." Eli smiled, modest but grateful. "Just doing my job." "You did more than that," she said. "You kept this place human." She meant it, and he could tell. It wasn't about the humiliation anymore. It was about being seen for what he truly was. Steady, kind, and resilient, in a place that hadn't made it easy to be any of those things. Customers noticed the difference too. People lingered longer, chatting at the registers again. There was laughter from the back aisles. The team seemed to breathe in rhythm instead of walking on eggshells. And though no one said his name, everyone felt the absence of Rick's presence, like the storm had finally passed and left behind clean air. Mr. Lewis stopped by one last time before heading back to his district rounds. He walked the floor quietly, observing the change. The energy, the morale, the smiles, all proof that leadership could heal as much as it could harm. When he reached Eli's register, he offered a small nod. "Looks like the store's finding its balance again," Eli nodded. "Feels different." "In a good way," Mr. Lewis paused, then said softly, "It's easy to correct numbers, harder to rebuild trust." "You helped with that?" Eli blinked, unsure how to respond. "I just tried to stay kind." "And that," Mr. Lewis said, "is what leadership really is." Then, as simply as he had arrived weeks before, he left. No grand farewell, no titles exchanged. Just a quiet understanding that something right had been restored. That evening, after closing, the team gathered for a few minutes before heading home. Carla brought in a box of donuts and paper cups of coffee, a small gesture, but it felt like a celebration. They laughed softly about customers, shared stories from the day, and for the first time, no one glanced nervously toward the office door. The laughter was easy again, unguarded. When Eli stepped outside into the night, the parking lot was empty, bathed in the glow of the streetlights. The air was cool, calm, and full of quiet possibility. He stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the city beyond the lot, and let out a slow breath, the kind that carries away months of weight. Rick's chapter was closed, but Eli's wasn't about revenge. It was about recovery. He hadn't fought back with anger or vengeance. He'd held his ground with patience, decency, and the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be broken. And in the end, that's what ended Rick's career. Not the district manager's clipboard, not the reports, but the undeniable truth that kindness has a way of exposing cruelty without saying a word. Eli turned, keys in hand, and walked to the bus stop, head high, pace steady. Justice had been served, quietly and completely. And for the first time in a long while, he felt free. The following weeks moved like a gentle tide, predictable, calm, and healing in their repetition. The store felt alive again, but not in the frantic way it once had been. There was laughter echoing from the stockroom, small jokes between registers, and a sense of ease that hung in the air like sunlight through a clean window. Customers felt it too. Even if they couldn't put it into words, they sensed the change. The smiles were real again. The workers stood straighter. The atmosphere, once stiff and cautious, now felt like a neighborhood corner store instead of a pressure cooker. And at the center of it all was Eli, still doing what he'd always done, showing up, staying kind, doing his work with quiet pride. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Rick's departure, Mr. Lewis returned one last time. He wasn't there for a formal inspection. No clipboard, no suit jacket. Just a simple button-down shirt and a coffee cup in hand. He stood at the end of Eli's register, waiting until the line cleared. When Eli noticed him, he smiled, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you again, sir." Mr. Lewis smiled back. "Just passing through. Thought I'd check on how things feel." Eli looked around, then back at him. "Different, better, people. Actually talk now." "That's good," Mr. Lewis said softly. "A workplace should never feel like a battlefield." He paused for a moment, as if measuring his next words carefully. "You know, Eli, not everyone could have handled what you did with the same grace. You didn't fight back in anger. You didn't try to humiliate anyone in return. You just kept being decent. And that did more to expose the truth than any complaint ever could." Eli shifted slightly, humbled. "I wasn't trying to prove anything, I just didn't want to become like him." Mr. Lewis nodded slowly. "That's the hardest lesson. And the most important one." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then with a final pat on Eli's shoulder, Mr. Lewis said, "Keep that attitude. It'll take you further than you think." And then he was gone, just as quietly as he'd entered Eli's life. In the days that followed, small moments reminded Eli of how much things had truly changed. The night manager brought him a coffee one morning. "You deserve it, man." The young cashier who used to avoid eye contact now asked him for advice. Even customers started calling him by name, remembering him not as the boy who got yelled at, but the one who stayed calm through the storm. One evening, while restocking shelves, Eli overheard 2 co-workers whispering nearby. "Can you believe how different it feels here now?" one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "It's like..." The place exhaled. Eli smiled to himself and kept working. One Saturday afternoon, Mrs. Patterson appeared again, pushing her cart full of groceries and flowers. "Ah, my favorite cashier," she said warmly. "How's life treating you now that the wind stopped blowing?" Eli chuckled. "Calmer, that's for sure." She leaned in, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You know, I heard what happened. Word gets around, dear. I just want to say, you handled it better than most people would have." He smiled shyly. "Thank you. I was just trying to do my job." "Oh, nonsense," she said, wagging a finger. "You were teaching a lesson, and not just to him. To everyone, that dignity doesn't need to shout." Her words settled over him like a warm blanket. And for the first time, Eli realized something. This entire ordeal hadn't just changed the store. It had changed him. He'd started this job thinking he just needed a paycheck. But somewhere between the long shifts, the mistreatment and the quiet endurance, he discovered something deeper, a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, but lives in the way you keep showing up. Even when the world tries to shrink you. Months later, Eli got an email from corporate. It was simple, a recognition note for exceptional customer service and professional conduct under challenging circumstances. It came with a small raise, and more importantly, an offer. Shift Leader Training Program. He stared at the screen for a long time before smiling, not because of the promotion itself, but because of what it meant. It meant someone saw him, really saw him, not as a quiet cashier, but as someone who led by example, and he accepted. On his first day of training, he arrived early. Same calm smile, same steady pace. As he walked the floor before opening, he paused by a register 3. The same spot where Rick had humiliated him months before. The same place that had once burned with shame. Now, it felt like something else entirely. A symbol, not of pain, but of endurance. He reached out, rested a hand on the counter, and smiled. Not bitterly, not triumphantly, just peacefully, because sometimes life gives you justice not with noise or revenge, but with growth. Slow, quiet, undeniable growth. As the doors opened and the first customers walked in, Eli took his place behind the counter once more. Different title, same heart, and for the first time the world didn't feel like it was watching him. It felt like it was with him. Some stories end with thunder, loud, explosive justice that demands to be noticed. But this one didn't need thunder. It ended the way most real justice does, quietly, steadily, in the simple return of peace. Eli never sought revenge. He never planned a rebellion or raised his voice to make a point. He simply did his work, stayed true to who he was, and trusted that the truth eventually would find its way to the surface. And it did. It's easy to underestimate that kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't fight back with venom, doesn't try to win, but sometimes quiet strength speaks louder than all the noise in the world. Every customer who'd watched Rick berate Eli that day left with an impression they wouldn't forget. Not of Rick's power, but of Eli's grace, because people remember how you make them feel. And Eli, even in humiliation, made people feel kindness, a calm reminder that decency still exists, even when it isn't returned. That's the real victory. Not the firing, not the corporate correction, but the proof that character outlasts cruelty. If you've ever been in Eli's position, undervalued, disrespected, or made small by someone who thought power was the same as leadership, maybe this story feels familiar. Maybe you've stood in that same quiet pain, wondering if staying kind even matters. It does. It always does, because staying kind isn't weakness. It's endurance. It's choosing not to let the world harden you. It's choosing to win without destroying what's good inside you. Eli didn't just keep his job, he earned something bigger, self-respect. And when the world finally caught up to that truth, it rewarded him in the only way that mattered, with peace, purpose, and a fresh start. So if you ever find yourself standing where Eli once stood, facing a voice that tries to break you down, remember this: you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you just need to keep showing up with quiet dignity until the flame burns itself out. Because real strength doesn't demand attention. It commands respect, eventually, inevitably, and completely.